it is my great pleasure to introduce today our chairholder, Professor Dr. Wayne Visser. Professor Visser is widely hailed as a global thought leader in sustainable business and corporate social responsibility. Having been recognized as a top 100 thought leader in the world in trustworthy business, a top 100 global sustainability leader, and a recipient of the Global CSR Excellent and Leadership Award. His work as a strategy analyst, sustainability advisor, CSR expert, futurist, and professional speaker has taken him to 74 countries in the past 30 years to work with over 150 clients, be it academic or business. Visser is the author also of 28 books and over about 320 other publications, with guest columns for The Guardian, The HuffPost, and the World Economic Forum. He previously held roles as a strategy analyst at Capgemini and the Director of Sustainability Services at KPMG. He is also a fellow at the institute that you see here, the University of Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership. He's an extraordinary professor at the Gordon Institute for Business Science in South Africa, and he's the founder also of CSR International and the director of a company called Kaleidoscope Futures. Please, Wayne, it's my pleasure to welcome you on the stage.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you especially to our chair partners, BASF, Port of Antwerp, and Randstad, Belgium. This headline that you see here, creating a shared future in a fractured world, may ring a bell for some of you, but it could have easily been a headline in 1987, which was when the term sustainable development was first coined by the Brundtland Commission under Gro Harlem Brundtland of the United Nations, coming out with the book, Our Common Future. That was 1987. Well, this was me in 1987. In fact, the headline comes from just a few days ago at the World Economic Forum, creating a shared future in a fractured world. And as you can see from some of the risks that are identified by the world's leaders right now, today, in 2018, we're still struggling with many of the issues of sustainable development 30 years later. But we must say that sustainable development has been a journey of progress and of success, not least under the Millennium Development Goals, which ended in 2015, which set about to tackle world poverty especially. And one of the huge achievements by governments around the world was that extreme poverty in developing countries dropped from 47% in 1990 to 14% in 2015. Really something that we can all be extremely proud of. Not only governments around the world, but also civil society. So in this book by Paul Hawken, a sustainability expert, he estimated that we have today more than 2 million NGOs all working on sustainable development. And business has also been extremely active over the last 30 years, working under the auspices of organizations like the World Business Council for Sustainable Development that was set up in 1992 with the first Rio Earth Summit, the Global Reporting Initiative, and the UN Global Compact. And of course, today we have the most recent set of initiatives, which is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, those 17 global goals that the world's governments and societies have signed up for. So definitely a story of progress. But if we're honest, also a story of failure. Here we see a picture of the 3 hurricanes which hit simultaneously in the United States last year. Climate change is one of those issues that we've made very little actual progress on. Human influence on the climate is clear, is scientifically irrefutable, and in fact shows that we now have greenhouse gas levels unprecedented in the last 800,000 years. It's not only about the environment. We also see that forced migration is an issue that we're really struggling with today. Around 65 million people in the world have been forced from their homes, of which 22 million of them are refugees. We've seen a huge decline in biodiversity around the world. In fact, since 1970, global populations of vertebrate species have declined 58%. Just think about that. In one generation, we've wiped out more than half of the life on the planet. That can hardly be considered a success. And inequality, despite millions of people coming out of poverty, has been going up. So the top 1% captured twice as much global income growth than the bottom 50% since 1980, causing rising inequality. So we have to take stock. And I think one of the reasons why we are still failing on some of these key issues is a lack of systems thinking. What is systems thinking? Well, according to the systems scientists like Fritjof Capra, it's really thinking in terms of relationships and patterns and context. And as the illustration shows, the reason why that's so difficult is because it is complex. This is not a new idea. In fact, the Prime Minister of South Africa in 1926, General Jan Smuts, was also a philosopher and a scientist, and he came up with a theory of evolution that he called the theory of holism. That was a first outline of what we today call systems theory. We've had the Gaia hypothesis and theory of James Lovelock, who was a NASA scientist, and applied this to the living systems of the Earth in the 1970s. In the 1980s, we had the theory of chaos and the complexity theory, which was popularized by James Gleick. What this all points to is that we may be at a really dangerous point in our history, what another systems scientist, Ervin Laszlo, calls the chaos point. And what the chaos point is, a point at which society will either tip into chaos, in other words, wide-scale societal breakdown, or it will break through to a higher level of civilization. And the question is, which way will we go? Well, I've experienced firsthand societal breakdown, and I grew up in South Africa, still under the apartheid system of discrimination. When I became a student for the first time at the University of Cape Town, studying a business science degree, protests were all around. Students were confronting police and army, military tanks on the campus. And what it really made me reflect on was a system that was broken. And it was in fact one of my professors, who was a labor economics professor, who was able to show me how apartheid was not only morally reprehensible, but also socially crazy and economically completely broken. And that gave me the evidence I needed to start to back up my societal consciousness that I already had. And what it was very clear to see there was that apartheid was a system that was based on three principles. It was exclusive, benefiting only the minority in power. It was exploitative, benefiting only those that were not the exploited labor and human rights. It was extractive, using human resources at an unsustainable rate. The worrying thing is, when I look at the global economy today, we see evidence of a very similar kind of global apartheid that exists. Exclusive, where the top 0.7% of the world's population is earning 45% of the global wealth. Only the bottom 70% gets 3% of the wealth. We see that it's exploitative, where the global economy uses 260 million underage or children workers and 40 million slave or forced labor workers. It's extractive, where materials have been extracted and harvested at a rate that's increased 60% since 1980 and 8-fold since the 1900s. Clearly, what sustainable has to mean is to reverse this, to come up with an economy that's genuinely inclusive, benefiting all groups in society, that's empowering, protecting labor and human rights, and restorative, using our human and natural resources sustainably. So what this comes to really is the first insight from systems thinking is that we have to clearly identify what's breaking down in society, which systems are malfunctioning. And the first system is what we see all around us of disruption. This can be natural catastrophes, market crises, pandemics, or indeed industrial accidents. According to the Global Peace Index, only 10 countries in the world today can be classified as conflict-free. One of the major forms of disruption we see is conflict in the world. According to Munich Re, around 200 natural disasters occurred in 1980, and that's gone up to 700 a year in 2016. So we're seeing a rise of disruption in the world. The second area of breakdown that we see is disconnection. What do we mean by this? Of course, it's about the use of technology and how well that's being shared, or indeed not shared, the great digital divide that's emerging. 4 billion people still lack access to the internet, and nearly 6 billion do not have a high-speed internet connection. 2 billion don't use a mobile phone, and almost 500 million still live outside of areas with a mobile signal. What we see emerging is another kind of inequality that is based on technology not being shared equally in the world. The third area where we see systemic breakdown is disparity. And I've mentioned already the rising inequality. In fact, from 1960, the absolute growth, the gap between average incomes of people in the richest and poorest countries have grown 135%. And indeed, we have to look within our own companies. The average CEO to worker pay in the United States has gone from 20 to 1 in 1965 to 300 to 1 today. We can't talk about greater inequality in society if we're not prepared to tackle it within our own companies. The fourth area of breakdown we see is clearly destruction. What you see at the top left there is a bird that's been cut open, a seabird, and that's plastic pollution inside of the bird. Not to mention air pollution, deforestation, unsustainable extraction of minerals, and so on. In fact, if current trends continue, by 2020, which is only 2 years away, we will have lost two-thirds of our vertebrate species on the planet. And climate change, if current trends continue, we'll see a 2.5-degree warming, and that will cost not only human society in terms of increased poverty, but also the global economy, $12 trillion by 2050. The final area then of disruption or of breakdown in society is discontent. This is obviously where health services are not being equitably shared around the world, but it's also things like the diseases of the rich or the diseases of lifestyle, such as obesity, heart attacks, indeed, strokes. These are all lifestyle diseases. It's also about stress in the workplace. More than 40% of deaths are now from non-communicable diseases. It used to be people died from tuberculosis or malaria. Now they're dying from things that we can actually prevent if we change our lifestyles. Depression and anxiety, a key area of mental health, affects 10% of people today and costs the global economy $1 trillion a year. And this is a figure that's going up, not down. So this is what I call the 5 forces of fragmentation. And this is a starting point for how we need to tackle sustainability in the world today. Tackling disruption, disconnection, disparity, destruction, and discontent. Now, how do we do that? I reflected on this quite long and hard after I left KPMG, after 6 years of running their sustainability services, working with many global companies. And I was very uncomfortable when I left because I sensed that something was not working. And so I launched CSR International. And at the launch event, I held a funeral. You can see that's me standing there with a coffin. We had funeral music, we had a eulogy, and who were we burying that day? Well, in fact, it was CSR that I believed had passed away peacefully in his sleep, another unfortunate victim of the global financial crisis, because I felt that the way that we were practicing corporate social responsibility really needed to die. It isn't working. And so luckily at that same event there was a birth on the same day, a new life was born, and I called it transformative CSR or CSR 2.0. So that was a lot of fun, a lot of amateur dramatics going on there. But what was it really about? Well, I simply took the metaphor of what was happening in the world with Web 1.0 and Web 2.0. We were going from a world where the internet was being used as a broadcast medium of one-way communication to Web 2.0, which suddenly went to scale and become far more interactive about user-generated content, blogs and wikis and tweets, and very much more innovative about beta testing all the time. And so I developed a bit of a theory there of how we needed to move from what I called CSR 1.0, which are companies that are still stuck in a defensive or a charitable or promotional or even a strategic approach to CSR that is not reversing those areas of breakdown that we've been looking at. And so we needed something transformational, CSR 2.0. And I developed a little test for that, CSR 2.0, based on 5 principles. There needs to be creativity built into CSR. There needs to be scalability. It's no point having nice pilot projects that we can show the media, but not going to scale on those solutions. Responsiveness, of course. We needed to be responding genuinely to stakeholder needs. Glocality, we needed to be thinking global but acting local. And circularity. Well, it's not the point to go into that in any detail here, except to say that what I got the most response from in that framing of CSR over the last 5 years or so was the excitement around the idea of creativity and circularity. And that really made me realize that we have to focus on the solutions. We know the areas of breakdown systemically. What would be systemic solutions? Well, if we found counterforces to those areas of breakdown, we'll find that we can do secure innovation in a resilience economy. This is obviously about lowering risk in society, aiding recovery when we have disasters or catastrophes, and ensuring that we have continuity, not only in societies, but in the economies and in businesses. This will help us address problems like the $330 billion of losses that are currently being experienced worldwide by natural catastrophes, of which $49 billion is still uninsured. And that's gone up in recent years. We need to be looking then at smart innovation in the exponential economy to counter disconnection. And this, of course, has to do with connecting people and things, the so-called Internet of Things, using big data and using artificial intelligence to tackle these big areas of problem that we have in society. Indeed, the increased use of exponential technologies could add $1.36 trillion to the global economic output by 2020. The third counterforce then is to create shared innovation in an access economy. This is really about creating more fairness and equity in society, more inclusive design to our products and services, and creating shared platforms where we can create more efficient use of our assets. And PwC estimates that this could be a huge boost to the economy, perhaps $335 billion by 2025. The fourth solution then is to counteract by having sustainable innovation in a circular economy. And this is actually a picture from Denmark. It's Kalundborg, which is one of the first experiments in industrial symbiosis, in other words, designing really for a circular economy. And I know that we're proud to have BASF here, and they'll talk a little bit about how they've also been one of the pioneers in this area of connecting one industry and one business to another so that the waste from one becomes the resources of another. So this is about bio and renewable products. It's about zero waste design and indeed being climate positive by starting to think about carbon not as a negative thing, but by having products that capture carbon and therefore become part of the solution. Accenture estimates that this could be worth 4.5 trillion by 2030. And the last counterforce then is to have satisfying innovation in a well-being economy. This is countering the discontent that we have, so it must be about human health, about the quality of life that we experience, meaning in work, and indeed about our happiness. According to the Global Wellness Institute, this could be worth $3.72 trillion in terms of economic benefits. So there we have the counterforces, or what I call the 5 forces of integration, if we think about this systemically in terms of connections and context. Well, I was inspired by all of these solutions I was starting to see, and it got me to travel around the world the last 2 years to film a documentary, because I really wanted to capture all this exciting innovation that was going on. And so one of the places we started was in the Netherlands, indeed, just up the road, and we filmed a company called Dutch Awareness. And what you're seeing there is the making of fibers or filaments from nylon, but a very special kind of polyester that can be recycled 100%. And in fact, you can't quite see it, but the suit that I'm wearing today is one of the first circular suits in the world. And this suit can be fully recycled 8 times. So it may have a full life over 8 lives of 40 or 50 years instead of just 5 years. We traveled up the road in the Netherlands to Interface. This is a global company that makes carpets, especially for offices. And we looked at how they're trying to fulfill their mission zero of having 0 negative environmental impact by 2020. They set that goal in 1995, and they're on track to meet it. 0 negative impact. That means 0 waste, carbon neutral, 0 or water neutral. So this is quite an inspiring story. We traveled then to Italy, to Novamont. It's a chemical company that is specialized now in making bioplastics and biodegradable plastics. And what you see in the background there, which I'll just make a bit bigger, is what they make their plastics from. Those are from thistles, so it's not something that you eat, but essentially a weed. They also make it from things like sunflowers. And what you see just in the front there is what happens to a biodegradable plastic plate after 30 days and then after 60 days of being in the natural environment. We visited in the UK a company called Biogen that's turning food waste into bioenergy, biogas, and also into biological fertilizer. Food waste is the number 3 solution to tackling climate change if we can tackle food waste. Roughly 1/3 of our food is wasted every day around the world. We then went to South Africa and we visited the 2nd largest remanufacturing plant in the world. What this does is takes Caterpillar heavy machinery and just before it's about to fail, it essentially refurbishes or remanufactures that. That not only saves thousands of tons of iron ore, but it saves the customer between 20 and 60% of the cost that they would pay if they were to replace that with new parts. We also went to Ecuador and we visited the city of Quito to look at what cities are doing to become more circular. And we visited the cloud forests around there, one of the villages called Yungia. And this story really stuck with me. This man that you see on the right there told how when he was young, with his father, they used to hunt in the forests. And they used to hunt bears and they used to cut trees. And in fact, they were completely deforesting the tropical area there in order to plant, in order to replace it with cattle ranching. But one day when they were hunting, they came across a bear that had a young baby bear with it. And as a child, he was moved by this and asked his father to spare the life of this young bear. And today he's a conservationist who's protecting the forest. In fact, they've managed to reforest huge areas around Quito. And not only that, he's a real champion for protecting the bears, which have been increasing in number now, and for promoting ecotourism in the area. And the lovely lady you see on the left is my wife, who's joined us here today, I'm happy to say. So this is the documentary that actually comes out just in a few days' time, and I'm happy to say will be premiered in terms of a screening in Belgium. This really leads to the 3rd key insight on systems thinking, is that how do we then take it from innovation to something more than that? We have to really rethink what we mean by creating value in society. It can't just be about creating financial value, although that's important. Of course, making profits is important. That's like breathing, but breathing is not our reason for being. Now, I'm not the first person to think about recreating value. This goes back to people like Ed Freeman questioning the shareholder value model by introducing stakeholder value in 1984. Paul Ekins introducing the idea of 4 capitals, so not just financial and manufactured capital, but also natural and human capital. John Elkington coming up with the triple bottom line of sustainability, people, planet and profit. Jed Emerson with the idea of blended value, which is the where you create social and financial value at the same time. Is particularly big in the idea of impact investing. C.K. Prahalad introducing the idea of the bottom of the pyramid, so creating value for the roughly 4 billion poor people in the world. Jonathan Porritt talking about 5 capitals, so adding social capital on. Stuart Hart about sustainable value, so starting to combine clean tech with base of the pyramid models and pollution prevention and so on. And then most recently, Michael Porter, Harvard professor, introducing the idea of shared value, where we can find synergies between social and economic benefits. So I'm not the first person to be thinking about this, and in fact many companies are already pioneering in this area. Puma with their environmental profit and loss account that starts to actually put financial values to their environmental impacts so that they can start making better decisions. This is a picture of 2 t-shirts that they made, one that's unsustainable, one that's more sustainable, and the environmental cost goes down from 17% of the cost of the t-shirt to 12%. We get the B-Lab movement, or the benefit corporation movement, that's introduced a way to assess companies. PwC with their total impact measurement and management, and KPMG with a true value measure. And all of this is trying to find a way to put financial values to our environmental and social impacts. So a lot of good work's going on. But for me, integrated value, which is the term that I coined in 2014, is much more than that. It's not only about how we rethink how we measure things, it's really about where we find the synergies between these areas of innovation, between solutions that are secure, smart, shared, sustainable, and satisfying. So I want to give you a few illustrations of that from real practice. If you look at this company, it's called Planet Lab, and their mission is to image the Earth every single day in detail. So their 200 satellites flying around the Earth in low orbit are taking photographs everywhere in the world every day so that they can give us useful information. And this happens to be the most extractive mine in the world, the biggest excavation in the world. It's in the United States. And you can see how just from 2013 the mine has changed to 2017. And so we start to map changes not only in things like this, but also in areas like deforestation, or like floods, or like fires. And so what we see when we start to apply integrated value is that this is a solution that's using the smart technologies of high tech, but is also helping us make a more secure future, dealing with resilience, in other words, and also sustainability. There's some other maps you can see that show how the growth of solar panel farms in China can be visibly seen from space. Another example is what Tesla's been doing, not only in Puerto Rico, but also in Australia in the last year, in the wake of storm damage from climate change, able to get communities back on their feet and back connected to the power grid by introducing the battery storage technology together with solar technology and wind in the case of Australia. So here we have a solution that's secure but also sustainable, helping us lower risk and deal with catastrophe, but clearly moving to renewables. If we go to Indonesia, we see Garbage Clinical Insurance, a company that allows the people in poor communities in Indonesia to collect their waste and to bring that waste in, and in exchange they get medical or clinical insurance. So you can see it's shared because it's including a part of the economy that was otherwise excluded, the most poor in the economy, but clearly tackling waste in a sustainable way and also satisfying because of the health benefits. If we look at this young lady, she's only 14 and she's created an app to help Alzheimer's patients, this is her grandmother, to recognize people once they have Alzheimer's and to stimulate their memories. And so it's amazing what we can do when we combine smart technologies with satisfaction or human health. Here we have Provenance in the UK, which is applying blockchain technology to supply chains and helping us to improve the traceability of supply chains like fish and other produce. Not only that, but they're linking it to financial incentives so that the producers or the farmers can actually get access to finance based on their ability to prove that they are sustainable through their supply chain. So smart and shared and sustainable. And the final example, this is Planetarians, which is taking food waste and turning it into high fiber, high protein food. So tackling two problems, child obesity being one and food waste being another. So a sustainable and satisfying solution. So you get the idea. And all of these are about making a positive impact. This really came into focus for me just a few years ago when I was on vacation with my wife in South Africa in a place called Sodwana Bay on the coast of KwaZulu-Natal. And we were at this beautiful beach, which turned out to be a near-death experience for us because we got caught in a riptide where the undercurrent sucked us out, pulled us out to the ocean. And so we nearly drowned. Fortunately, we didn't, and we can be here today for this inauguration. But it really gets you reflecting on the meaning of life and what's important in life and how we can make a difference. Fortunately, I'd been reflecting on that for some time already, and I'd been very interested in this theme and very influenced by a book called Man's Search for Meaning by an Austrian psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl, who survived 4 Nazi concentration camps. And what he noticed in surviving that was that the people who were most able to survive even those most terrible conditions were people that had a higher purpose, something to believe in, something that gave them meaning in their life. And I was so inspired by that that I actually made it the basis of my PhD research, which was looking at why do people engage with sustainability at a deep psychological level using existential psychology. What does it add to our lives? And of course I found that it's a very powerful driver. And in fact what I found is that there are 4 different types of what I call purpose-inspired leaders. And for The Guardian I had to translate that a little bit out of academic language. So I talked about the inner superheroes of sustainability. That work on leadership continued with my work with Cambridge University at the Institute for Sustainability Leadership, where the research, as head of research there, we looked at leaders and those leaders that are really making an impact in the world on sustainability. And we found that they actually have different kinds of characteristics. One, they understand the context much better than anybody else. They understand these mega trends I've been talking about. But 2, they're able to apply certain characteristics such as systems thinking, such as empathy, such as innovation or creative mindsets to these global problems. And just 2 examples I think that are very good ones. Paul Pullman, of course, CEO of Unilever with his Sustainable Living Plan, making sure that Sustainable Living Plan is not his sustainability strategy, but is the company's strategy. There is no other strategy. And it's to double in size while halving their environmental footprint, helping 1 billion people out of poverty, and certifying 100% of their agricultural products as sustainable. Or Hamdi Ulukai from Chobani, a company that is a food manufacturer and distributor in the United States that has made his company all about helping refugees, employing them, empowering them, giving them shares in his company. And I think the founder of Hewlett-Packard, David Packard, really puts it in a nutshell when he says, why are we here? I think many people assume wrongly that a company exists solely to make money. Money is an important part of a company's existence if the company is any good, but it is a result, not a cause. We have to go deeper and find the real reason for our being. And indeed, this brings me back to where I started as that young student in the time when society was nearly falling apart. There was a massive conflict going on. We were on the brink of a civil war. And then we had a miracle in the form of Nelson Mandela, and I was privileged then to queue up like so many millions of others and to vote in the first democratic election of a black president in South Africa. And what a celebration that was. And we could learn many lessons in sustainable transformation from what happened there in South Africa, because we're also at a very perilous time in our history, and we also have to make that positive, miraculous change right now. And when I reflect on those lessons, the one that really stands out for me is that Mandela brought us the gift of hope. What he showed us was that it is possible, even in the most trying circumstances, to triumph. And I think really that's what we need to bring to the next generation of leaders, and we're going to have a few represented here today sharing some reflections to show them that it is possible to avert the crisis and to design and to live in a truly sustainable world. I want to end now with a proverb from Africa, which says, if you want to go far, go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And clearly in sustainability we have to go together. There is no other choice. But that means that we have to do two things quite differently. We have to become much better storytellers, because at the moment most of the world is not convinced that sustainability is a better future. Sounds crazy, but it's true. We haven't been very good at creating what Professor Lars Moratis calls a narrative intelligence in sustainability. The other thing we have to do much better is collaboration, and indeed I'm delighted that this chair is a form of collaboration in itself, with the chair partners represented here today. But of course there's been wonderful collaboration within AMS, and I'm very grateful to our partners there, to Dean Paul, with whom I wouldn't be here today, but also in our Sustainable Transformation Lab to Eva Geluk, who you'll hear from in closing, and some of the other academics and professors who are represented here tonight. And of course the partnership that we are forging with the University of Antwerp, where we will be setting up the Antwerp Centre for Sustainability. So collaboration is key. So I want to end with two quotes then. The first is by Chico Mendes, who is or was an activist, a rubber tapper in Brazil, and a human rights activist. In fact, he got murdered for his troubles. And he said, at first, I thought I was fighting to save rubber trees. Then I thought I was fighting to save the Amazon rainforest. Now I realize I'm fighting to save humanity. That's the urgency right there. And then Mahatma Gandhi, who said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. That's the hope. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.